Alright guys, welcome back to another episode of Fry Brothers Fishing. Today I'm fishing spillways, and I'm going to teach you how to fish a spillway better than the way you do it now. So, spillway breakdown. You want to start off with a jig head that matches the depth and the current so that you don't get snagged and that you're presenting the lure in such a way that it would be swimming downstream just like a regular fish. So almost always casting relatively upstream. This is kind of extreme. A lot of time I'll go at a 45-degree angle and you're letting it sink, but you have to keep some tension in your line so that you can feel the bottom. And your goal is to match that jig head weight so that you can get to the bottom, tick the bottom, but not get snagged and present it in a way that everything feels natural. See, little snag. Should have been reeling faster. So this is another good tip. The old line pop comes right out most of the time. I'm rolling over a big rock right now. So that's another thing that goes with spillway fishing, is mapping out the bottom. I'm not gonna go get my fish finder and get in a boat, because to get down here is like a hill like that. So I'm not taking my fish finder down here. So you're really just ticking the bottom with that jig head and trying to remember where all the big rocks are. If you can kind of draw a picture in your mind with that jig head, that really helps, so you can kind of find those good spots. Like, I know that there's a giant rock right down there. I know that this shelf right here has some rocks sticking out of it pretty far, but it's also got some pockets in it. And you guys can see me kind of twitching my rod. That's when I'm ticking the bottom. If I feel like I'm getting a little too stuck or it's sliding down in the rocks, you need to give it a little pop. Most of the time it doesn't take much. Just a little twitch of the rod, you know, a 6-inch movement. And that's a pretty good way to add some noise as well, especially when you're fishing dirty water like I am today. So when you're giving it that little pop, it'll hit the rocks a little bit harder, and your bait's not moving that much, so it could catch the attention of one of these saugeye or bass or anything in there. Watch your hooks. A lot of time when you're doing line popping and fishing really rocky areas like this, your hooks are gonna get bent, and if you don't notice that, you could lose a fish. And saugeye fishing, to me, is just casting over and over and over and over. So they kind of hit in spurts. So like, I found that 9 o'clock to 11 o'clock is a pretty good time to catch them here. And then again, later before the sun comes down, there's a kind of an afternoon bite that goes on. So you can also watch the tip of your rod. If you don't have a real sensitive rod, or like mine, your rod tip's broken, so it lost some sensitivity, you can just reel nice and slow, and if your rod tip loads up more than normal, like when I tick a rock, it loads up just a little bit, but if I start to get snagged, the rod tip will go down too far, and I'll know that I'm getting too deep in the rocks and I need to pop it out of there. Another kind of obvious one, just another tip, is when you are reeling back to you, you need to keep your rod pointed fairly high up, kind of about a 45-degree angle from where you are. That way you are able to see that rod tip load, and also you have enough room to pull back and set the hook. You're at a pretty good angle to reel down and set the hook as well. Keeping that rod tip up not only does that, but it also orients your jig head in such a way that it's less likely to get snagged. If you're pointing your rod tip down here, then for one, you're not gonna feel anything on the bottom, because you're going, basically all the tension is running straight through the line and you're not really even using your rod. Breaking down the water a little bit. So obviously everything's coming from up there and going that way. There is certain things that you want to look for in the water where the saugeye will stack up. So this is all kind of going the same speed, but there's a little bit of a swirl out there in the middle, and out there there's a big dead area. So all that current is getting funneled down there and over there. So it creates that backwater space there. There's another piece of backwater that kind of extends up. And I know from mapping this place out with my jig head that those rocks kind of taper out right at where the water starts to give that definitive line between current pushing into it and it pushing back. So they like to sit on those seams. So what I'll do, instead of casting upstream to drift something like that, I'll cast into the current fairly high above it, and I'll drift into that seam. So this saw guy will be sitting upstream down on the bottom, and they're not a fish that loves to expel a lot of energy. They're pretty good at letting their food come to them. So when it does arrive, you need it to be drifting downstream in such a way that it looks like a minnow. And like, if you change that presentation, it really lowers your catch percentage. If I'm casting downstream and reeling up, yeah, I'm probably not gonna get snagged, but there's also way less of a chance that I'm gonna catch a fish. Typically, fish aren't getting pulled off of that spillway and trying to swim back up to it, at least not little ones. I've seen carp try to jump up just about everything, but casting downstream not only kind of defeats the purpose of drift fishing, but you're also coming back up on the saw guy from their tail to their head, so they have less of an amount of time to actually see or hear your bait. And when they come up to strike it, they're going to be sitting like this in the water. So if you drift your bait right in front of their face, they're just going to be able to make an easy movement and come over here, grab the bait or grab the minnow, whatever you're using, as opposed to the fish facing, you know, still facing that way, you bringing your lure up this way, bringing it upstream. There's just a lot less likelihood that you're going to catch a fish like that. It can be done. Fish are opportunistic, but that's just one of those things that's going to up your chances. So another thing you'll notice is I'm reeling slow enough that I can still feel the tension in my line, but I'm not pulling my lure. I'm matching the speed of the current like you would with a fly rod in a trout stream. Just trying to keep it nice and consistent. So you cast out, it's pretty deep up there, so I'm just letting it sink and picking up line. And now as it starts to get towards the bottom, when I feel my first tick, I know it's kind of in that bottom water column. So then I'll pick up the speed maybe a little bit and start ticking rocks. Start ticking little rocks as much as you can. I find that I can fish for a lot longer if I'm just doing a constant retrieve. I do catch a lot of fish that way. But a lot of people like the hopping method, where you're casting out, letting it sink, letting it hit the bottom. And some of these people use heavier weights than I'm using. They'll let it hit the bottom, and then once they feel the bottom, they'll just hop it back to them. Pick up some slack, hop it back. That's another really pretty efficient way. Another thing I like to do at these spillways is fish these scroungers. When you're fishing shallow areas like that area over there, there's some rocks right off that point, and it gets down to about a foot, maybe even 6 inches or so. Out there where I cast it, it's probably about 3 feet where that rock kind of tapers down. And where I was throwing my jig head, trying to get nice and deep, they sink faster than scroungers do. This one, when I'm fishing shallow like this, you can tick rocks and not get snagged because of that bill that's on the scrounger, and it's easier to pop everything off. So if you're fishing a shallow spillway or the water's a little bit slower, then throw on scrounger moves more water than a paddle tail does. It displaces more water, so when it's going past the fish, whether it be largemouth or saugeye or whatever, they're more likely to bite in this muddy water with that water displacement. So I'll give you guys a breakdown of what's happening with this scrounger. So that shallow point out there drops off on my side, but on the far side, it's deeper. I couldn't do this from this angle with my jig head because I would get snagged coming up the side of the point, coming up that hump. So with my scrounger, I can cast that out there. It's on the deep side, it's in dead water. It's gonna cross through a current seam. That bubble line out there, that's a current seam. So that would be one of the places I'm ready for a bite. And the first tick I feel, which should be pretty soon here, first tick, I start reeling a little bit faster and knocking those rocks. A little bit faster, knocking rocks. Now I'm on the point. Now I'm coming over the point. Now I'm slowing down to get down to the bottom. Just going down this side of the hump, going through that deeper water and popping off rocks. So as it gets to this point where it gets into this current, I'm probably not gonna catch anything there. So I'll just reel it back in and cast again. So the third thing that me and Travis both like to do is fish with these giant swim baits at spillways, trying to catch saugeye. These things make tons of noise. They displace a ton of water. And I know they look giant, but shad get way bigger than this bait does, and saugeye eat them. I've pulled plenty of 3 and 4 pound saugeye out of these holes that I'm fishing right now, and they might not be able to take this thing down completely, but they will definitely try. So when I'm using these, I fish these a little bit different. So this is a sinking one. I'm not gonna drift fish these like I would a swim bait. So I'll cast this one out, and this is all pretty shallow right here. I'll cast into that current seam, and just to get some noise, give it a couple jerks, kind of make my presence known in the water. And then also adding a constant retrieve. So this is a good place to kind of break down, because you have 1, 2, 3, 4, little bit of a fifth one that kind of meets up. There's 4 places, maybe 5, where the current is pushing down pretty fast, and then you get these dead spots, those eddies over there. That's where you're probably gonna get bit. So with both swim baits and glide baits and grubs and anything like that, in this type of a situation, I want to be casting, we'll do it here just for ease, casting into the current as if you were a minnow or a fish or shad of some sort, getting trapped into the current, kind of falling down that ledge. And as it comes out onto these seams, most of the time when you get bit, you're going to be right where the fast current meets this spinning kind of dead water. They'll sit and wait right on these current seams so that the food comes to them instead of them chasing food. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode of Fry Brothers Fishing. Please hit that subscribe button, like, comment, share, ask us some questions, give us new video ideas, and we will be bringing you more videos soon, hopefully of me crushing fish on these giant glide baits.